Thank you for the opportunity to present our recent findings from a systematic review of economic studies which looked at the different treatments that are used to manage chronic functional constipation in children and young people. And these are the affiliations that we need to disclose as part of this presentation. Chronic functional constipation in childhood is a common complaint characterized by a reduced frequency or difficulty in passing a stool. It's a highly prevalent and costly condition, affecting as many as 1 in 3 children. The annual constipation treatment costs to the NHS in England in 2018-2019 were conservatively estimated at £168 million. In addition to notable indirect social costs, which include missed days at school. Identifying clinically effective treatments that optimise cost effectiveness is key to ensuring a sustainable health service, but we have little insight to whether interventions currently delivered to children with chronic functional constipation are effective or cost effective. A recent systematic review evaluated the cost effectiveness of treatment for chronic constipation, focusing only on full economic evaluations in adults and children. The authors identified 10 studies that reported economic evidence, but this evidence came from adults only. No evidence for children or special populations was found. Here we report the economic findings from a recent systematic review that was conducted as part of a larger health technology assessment project, building on earlier published work by Hagen 2018. We've broadened the scope of this systematic review to identify all types of economic studies of interventions used to manage chronic functional constipation. The selection criteria for this review were predefined and published in Prospero. We systematically searched 10 electronic databases plus supplementary searches of grey literature and relevant websites. Backward and forward citation tracking were conducted, and searches were conducted from October 2011 to February 2020. In addition to the systematic searches, the reviewers also took the decision to update the searches based on Hagen 2018. Studies which were tagged as potentially having economic evidence in the scoping review were carried through for more detailed data extraction. We included all study types which reported any evidence of cost, regardless of design. We extracted all information related to economic evidence within each study, including the economic question, the type of study, costs and benefits, and key economic findings. The type of economic study was coded as either cost consequence, cost effectiveness, cost utility, cost benefit, cost analysis, unclear or unreported. These were then mapped by 2 independent reviewers to an intervention category based on the complexity of delivering the intervention and the providers, which is shown in the figure 1 here. Finally, a narrative review of the relevant studies was undertaken to arrive at some overall conclusions regarding the state of knowledge of cost effectiveness of interventions within the UK. Our searchers identified 32,826 potential studies. We retrieved 1,747 papers. Of these, 33 met our selection criteria. Most of the studies were conducted in the US or the UK, or were based on secondary data from more than one country. Of the 33 studies, 8 specifically aimed to evaluate economic evidence. The remaining studies employed a variety of different study designs. The majority of studies were reported from a health perspective and were conducted in a hospital-based setting or primary care, patient home or community setting. Interventions described were diverse, but included laxatives, physiotherapy, complementary therapies, educational online training, multidisciplinary clinics, and sacral neuromodulation. 2 of the studies specifically focused on children with additional support needs. Most of the included studies reported a cost analysis or a cost utility, although the reporting was frequently poor, with very limited details provided. The type of economic evidence mapped to the different intervention categories is presented in the figure shown here. The most frequently reported economic evidence reported on papers that mapped to more than one intervention category, and the least frequently reported evidence was for interventions specifically delivered by continence teams or specialist services. Our review identified relatively few studies, and we know that few studies have systematically explored the economic impact of constipation in children and young people. Less than a quarter of the studies that we identified specifically aimed to evaluate economic evidence, and the majority of the economic evidence identified within our review comes from studies which report cost analysis, with partially reported detail. Much of the existing evidence appears to rely heavily on the findings of a handful of studies that are more than a decade old. Our concluding message is this. While this is the first systematic review to identify all types of economic evidence, we found a paucity of available current economic data. What little data we did find was frequently out of date. Robust economic evidence for interventions is urgently required to keep pace with the increase in emerging treatments in children and young people with constipation. We'd like to thank our stakeholder group members for their invaluable contribution to this study and acknowledge the funding that we have received from the NIHR. Thank you for listening.